The ground beneath your feet is nothing but a fragile illusion waiting to shatter. Welcome to my philosophy channel. This video may be long, but if you stay until the end, you may finally understand why reality is not as stable as you believe, why knowledge is built on uncertainty, and why society runs on invisible structures. We live our entire lives inside a comforting dream, terrified of waking up to the cold and indifferent truth that hides just beneath the surface of human perception. Chapter 1: The Fragility of Reality. You sit in a room and look around at the objects that surround you. You see a solid wooden table, a ceramic cup, and the glowing screen of a digital device. You feel completely certain that these things exist exactly as you perceive them. But Bertrand Russell, one of the greatest philosophers of the 20th century, demands that we question this fundamental assumption. He asks if anything is truly certain. Consider the ordinary table standing right in front of you. If you look at it from one angle, the wood appears dark and rich. If you move toward the window, the sunlight strikes the surface, transforming the color into a brilliant and bright shade. Which color is the real color of the table? We assume there is one true color, yet our eyes constantly receive completely different visual information. We place our hands upon the wood and feel a smooth, polished surface, yet if we were to look through a powerful microscope, that same surface would appear rough, jagged, and resembling a mountainous landscape. Which texture represents the true reality of the object? Is it the smoothness felt by the naked human hand, or the chaotic roughness revealed by the scientific lens? The answer remains profoundly elusive to us. We do not actually experience the table itself. We only experience what philosophers call sense data. We experience specific colors, distinct textures, and particular shapes. Our human brain takes this fragmented information and instantly constructs the concept of a solid table. We confuse our mental construction with the actual physical object. The table in your mind is merely a translation of sensory signals, not the objective reality itself. Think about the modern digital world we inhabit every single day. You stare at a beautiful photograph on your smartphone screen and feel genuine emotion, but the photograph does not actually exist inside the device. There are only millions of microscopic pixels illuminating in specific mathematical patterns. We react to the illusion of the image, completely ignoring the underlying code. Our physical reality operates according to this exact same principle. Recognizing this disconnect between perception and reality induces a deep psychological vertigo. If we cannot trust the solidity of the table in front of us, how can we trust anything else in our lives? We build our existential foundation upon the assumption that the world is stable and objective. When we realize that we are trapped inside our own sensory apparatus, a terrifying sense of isolation begins to take hold. From the moment we are born, we are conditioned to trust our physical senses without any hesitation. We believe that seeing is believing, and that touching confirms existence. Yet science and philosophy both prove that our senses are highly flawed instruments. They do not reveal the truth of the universe. They only provide the minimal information required for human survival. We are simply biological machines navigating through a dark room. Centuries ago, René Descartes wondered if he was merely dreaming his entire existence. When you are deep inside a dream, the environment feels absolutely solid and completely real. You feel terror, joy, and physical pain. It is only when you finally wake up that you realize the entire experience was a fabrication of your own mind. Bertrand Russell suggests that our waking life might function in a shockingly similar manner. The physical universe might exist independently of our minds, but we can never access it directly. We are forever separated from true reality by the filter of our own consciousness. This is the foundational crisis of human epistemology. Before we can understand society, power, or the meaning of work, we must first acknowledge the frightening fragility of the world we think we inhabit. We must courageously embrace the absolute doubt. A mind that refuses to question the surface of the world will forever remain imprisoned by its own fabrications. Chapter 2. The Collapse of Certainty. The foundations of your knowledge are built upon shifting sands of sensory confusion. We often assume that seeing is equivalent to knowing. We walk through our lives believing that our eyes provide an accurate map of the physical world. But once you apply the pressure of philosophical analysis, this certainty quickly begins to dissolve. Bertrand Russell points out that what we perceive is never the actual object itself, but only a fleeting representation. Take a simple object like a polished table, sitting quietly in your living room. To your eyes, it possesses a constant color and a definite shape. However, if you walk around the table, the distribution of light changes every single second. The brown grain might suddenly flash with white highlights depending on your position relative to the windows. Which version of the table is the true one? If 3 different people stand in 3 different parts of the room, they will each report a different visual experience. They cannot all be seeing the same objective color simultaneously. This simple realization forces us to concede that color is not an inherent property of the object alone. This is the moment where your common sense begins to fail you. We use words like red or smooth to describe things, but these words are actually describing our own private internal experiences. Russell calls these primary experiences sense data. We are acquainted with the data, but we are not directly acquainted with the physical matter that causes it. Imagine the psychological impact of realizing that you are trapped behind your own eyes. Every person you love and every object you touch is translated into electrical signals within your brain. You are like a person watching a live feed from a remote camera, never able to step outside and touch the reality directly. This creates a deep existential isolation. Consider the history of this radical doubt. Hundreds of years before Russell, René Descartes sat by his fire and wondered if a malicious demon was feeding him a total illusion. He realized that he could doubt the existence of his own body and the solid earth, but he could not doubt the fact that he was thinking. Russell takes this skepticism even further into the modern scientific era. He asks why we believe in a physical world at all. We believe in it not because we have a logical proof, but because we have a powerful instinctive belief. We assume there must be a cause for our visual sensations, but we can never prove it. In our modern digital landscape, this collapse of certainty is more relevant than ever before. We spend hours every day staring at glowing rectangles that present us with a simulated reality. We look at filtered photographs of perfect lives and artificial landscapes, forgetting that the digital sense data is only a mathematical approximation of a hidden truth. Why are humans so terrified of uncertainty? We desperately crave stability because it allows us to navigate the world without constant panic. If we admitted that our senses could be wrong at any moment, our entire psychological foundation would crumble into dust. We choose the comforting lie over the complex and fragmented truth of our existence. Think about your own internal process. When you encounter a contradiction, when 2 people witness the same event but describe it in completely different ways, we often accuse one of lying. We cannot accept that perception itself is inherently subjective and unreliable. We demand a single objective reality that simply does not exist in our direct experience. When you touch the surface of the table, you feel resistance. You call this hardness. But physics tells us that the table is mostly empty space filled with tiny particles moving at immense speeds. The hardness you feel is not the solidity of matter, but the repulsion of electric charges between your fingers and the object. Even the shape of the object is a matter of perspective. A round coin looks like an oval when viewed from the side. We only call it round because we have reached a societal agreement to prioritize one specific viewing angle over all others. Our entire knowledge base is built upon these arbitrary agreements and categorical filters. This realization is not merely an academic exercise. It is a way to break free from the dogmatic slumber that keeps us blind to the complexity of life. When you stop believing in the absolute certainty of your eyes, you begin to see the world as a beautiful and mysterious puzzle that can never be fully solved. We often judge others based on appearances, never pausing to consider that appearance is only a shallow mask. We build entire social hierarchies based on visual cues that are fundamentally unreliable. We categorize human beings like objects, assuming that the sense data we receive tells us everything we need to know about their internal soul. Russell suggests that the value of philosophy lies in its very uncertainty. By teaching us that things are not always what they seem, it protects us from the arrogance of absolute conviction. It reminds us that the world is vastly larger and more intricate than our tiny windows of perception can ever truly capture. As you look around your room now, try to see the sense data instead of the objects. Notice the way the shadows crawl across the wall and the way the colors shimmer and change. Acknowledge the fact that you are a participant in a constant act of mental construction. You are building your own universe every second. The quest for absolute certainty is a journey toward a mirage that recedes the moment you approach it. Chapter 3. The structure behind the world. The universe is not made of solid objects, but of invisible relationships and unbreakable facts. Let us step beyond the illusions of our senses and ask what truly constitutes the foundation of reality. When you look at the physical world, your mind naturally divides it into isolated objects like trees, buildings, and human beings. However, Bertrand Russell proposed a radically different vision through his philosophy of logical atomism. He declared that the world is fundamentally composed of facts, not things. What exactly does it mean for reality to be built upon facts? Consider a single red flower blooming in a garden. The flower itself is not the fundamental unit of reality, nor is the color red. The absolute minimum unit is the unbreakable combination of the two. The fact that this particular flower possesses this red attribute. Russell called these indivisible units atomic facts. We are psychologically conditioned to view ourselves as isolated entities moving through an environment of disconnected objects. Traditional philosophers like Hegel argued that everything is united within one absolute spiritual consciousness. Russell violently rejected this comforting, abstract spiritual unity. He stripped away the mystical comfort, presenting a cold, precise universe where independent facts exist, without requiring our observation or human permission. Think of how we construct our modern digital reality today. A computer program does not operate using physical objects. It operates using strings of logical data, relationships, and specific conditional facts. Just as a software environment is built line by line from atomic pieces of code, Russell believed our physical reality is built from atomic facts. The universe operates as a supreme mathematical structure in total silence. This philosophical framework relies heavily on a strict separation between the human observer and the observed reality. The fact that the flower is red remains true regardless of whether a human being is standing there to witness it. This grants reality an intimidating independence. It means the universe does not care about our emotional interpretations or our desperate need to find subjective meaning within its structure. Yet, there is a profound psychological vulnerability hidden within this logical system. How do we definitively isolate a single atomic fact? The redness of the flower could be further divided into specific light wavelengths. Those wavelengths could be divided into moving photons. Our attempt to find the absolute bottom of reality always depends on our human perspective. Our desire for perfect precision ultimately collides with biological limitations. The architecture of the universe is flawless, but the mind trying to map it will always remain imperfect. Chapter 4: Language as a Mirror. Words are the fragile bridges we build to cross the silent abyss of reality. When we speak, we naively believe that our language perfectly reflects the physical universe. We assume that for every noun we utter, a corresponding physical entity exists somewhere in the real world. Bertrand Russell argued that language is supposed to function as a perfect mirror, sharing the exact same logical structure as the facts it attempts to describe. This concept is known as the isomorphism of language and the world. Think of it like a key, perfectly matching the internal mechanism of a complex lock. An atomic proposition in our speech should directly connect to an atomic fact in the universe. If the structure of our sentence matches the structure of reality, we hold the truth. If it fails to match, we speak pure nonsense. But human language is deeply flawed and tremendously deceptive. We are psychologically hardwired to believe that merely naming something grants its solid existence. We create grand abstract concepts like absolute spirit or perfect justice, and because we possess the vocabulary, we subconsciously convince ourselves these things wander the earth like physical creatures. We become entangled in a web of our own making. Observe the modern digital ecosystem, where social media feeds are flooded with trending buzzwords and fabricated labels. We invent endless new terms to describe our identities, our traumas, and our political enemies. Soon, these invented words begin to dictate our physical reality. We forget that the map is not the territory, and we end up going to war over syllables that have no corresponding atomic facts. Russell famously illustrated this trap by analyzing statements about fictional entities. Consider the sentence declaring that the present king of France is bald. The human mind automatically searches for the king, even though France currently possesses no monarch. Traditional philosophers tied themselves in knots, trying to explain how a non-existent subject could possess properties in some mystical realm of thought. Russell shattered this linguistic illusion by dismantling the sentence into its underlying logical parts. He proved that language often hides its true meaning beneath deceptive grammatical costumes. By stripping away the deceptive outer layer, he demonstrated that we do not need to invent magical alternative universes just to make sense of sentences about things that simply do not exist. A vocabulary devoid of reality is the most dangerous prison a human mind can inhabit. Chapter 5: The Failure of Meaning. Words can create entire universes, but they can also trap us inside a void of nonsense. We desperately want to believe that everything we say possesses deep and inherent meaning. We trust our sentences to act as solid bridges between our inner thoughts and the external universe. But what happens when we speak, and there is absolutely nothing waiting on the other side? The bridge simply collapses into a bottomless abyss of linguistic emptiness. Bertrand Russell discovered a terrifying flaw hidden deep within the architecture of human language. He realized that words possess the dangerous ability to contradict themselves entirely. Consider the ancient and maddening statement where a person declares that the very sentence they are speaking is completely false. If the statement is true, it must be false. If it is false, it must be true. This is not merely a clever word game designed to confuse the intellect. It is a fundamental crack in the mirror of reality. When language turns back upon itself, it creates an infinite loop that strips away all objective meaning. We are suddenly left staring into a hall of mirrors where truth and falsehood dissolve into a disorienting blur of empty syllables. Look closely at our modern digital environment, where millions of voices shout into the endless void every single minute. We constantly consume statements that refer only to other statements, entirely disconnected from any physical reality. We argue passionately over artificial concepts, chasing synthetic truths through a labyrinth of self-referential data. We are drowning in information, yet completely starved of genuine meaning. To escape this linguistic trap, Russell suggested that we must strictly separate language into different hierarchical levels. A statement cannot validly talk about itself without creating a devastating logical catastrophe. By trying to force language beyond its natural boundaries, we destroy the very mechanism that allows us to comprehend the universe. Our ambition blindly betrays our understanding. How many bitter arguments have you endured where both sides were, effectively speaking, pure nonsense? We fight relentlessly over grand ideological terms, assuming those words point to unshakable universal truths. Yet when we rigorously analyze the underlying logic, we often find that the words simply point to absolutely nothing. The argument is merely a ghost fighting another ghost in the dark. Why are we so profoundly terrified of meaningless language? Because admitting that our words might be empty requires us to face our own existential insignificance. We wrap ourselves in layers of complex vocabulary to hide from the vast, indifferent silence of the physical universe. We use constant chatter as a psychological shield against the cold reality of the unknown. There is a vital distinction between truly knowing something through direct physical experience and merely describing it with flimsy words. You can describe the precise biological mechanisms of pain, using perfect clinical terminology. But until you actually feel the searing agony burn through your own nerves, your elegant words are utterly hollow and devoid of genuine comprehension. We see this disconnect masterfully weaponized in the realms of politics and corporate power. Leaders craft intricate speeches filled with beautiful buzzwords that deliberately conceal a complete lack of substance. They use the complex structure of grammar to hypnotize the public, creating an illusion of profound truth. The meaning does not fail by accident. It is systematically assassinated for control. When we finally recognize the severe limitations of our own speech, we must cultivate a deep reverence for silence. We must accept that some truths cannot ever be forced into the narrow confines of a written sentence. True wisdom demands that we stop trying to capture the infinite universe with the clumsy, finite net of human syllables. The most profound realities will always exist in the quiet spaces where our language finally fails. Chapter 6. The Illusion of Knowledge. We spend our entire lives confusing the shadow on the wall with the object casting it. Bertrand Russell proposed a radical division in how human beings acquire their understanding of the universe. He categorized our comprehension into two distinct realms: knowledge by acquaintance and knowledge by description. This division exposes a terrifying illusion at the core of our daily existence. We assume we know the world intimately, but most of our knowledge is entirely secondhand and profoundly vulnerable. Knowledge by acquaintance is the pure, unfiltered grasp of reality through direct sensory experience or internal introspection. When you burn your hand on a hot stove, the searing agony is direct and undeniable. You do not need anyone to explain the pain to you. It requires no intermediary, no linguistic translation, and no external validation from society to prove that it truly exists. This direct experience represents the only absolute certainty we possess in a universe filled with relentless doubt. However, this epistemological certainty comes with a devastating psychological price. Knowledge by acquaintance is entirely private and fundamentally incommunicable. You can never truly share your exact sensation of the color red, nor can you directly transfer your deepest emotional anguish into another human mind. Because direct experience is so isolated and deeply personal, we must rely extensively on the second category, knowledge by description. This is the knowledge we acquire through intermediaries like spoken language, written books, historical records, and the unreliable testimony of other people. If you know that Paris is the capital of France but have never visited, you rely entirely on descriptive knowledge. Description operates as the foundational pillar of human civilization, allowing us to build complex sciences and cultures without experiencing everything ourselves. However, its reliability depends entirely on its ability to eventually be traced back to direct acquaintance. If a descriptive claim cannot be anchored to real sensory evidence, it risks becoming a meaningless illusion. Our entire reality quickly becomes a fragile web of hearsay. Look closely at the modern information age, where we are constantly bombarded with endless streams of descriptive knowledge every single day. We scroll through infinite articles, watch documentaries about distant galaxies, and read heated debates about abstract economic theories. We absorb all this synthetic data and foolishly confuse it with genuine wisdom. We arrogantly believe we understand the world, yet we remain utterly blind. We possess powerful smartphones that can access the entire archive of human history in mere seconds. But having access to a highly detailed map is not the same as actually walking the physical territory. We suffer from an epic delusion of omniscience. We argue passionately online about complex biological sciences, mistaking our memorized vocabulary for actual, lived comprehension of the subject matter. Why do we cling so desperately to this vast ocean of descriptive knowledge? Because acknowledging the severe limits of our direct acquaintance would deeply wound our enormous egos. It terrifies us to admit that our personal grasp on reality is confined to the tiny bubble of our own limited senses. We use borrowed facts as a psychological armor to protect ourselves from the unknown. Consider the profound difference between knowing the clinical word for heartbreak and actually experiencing the searing loss of a cherished, loved one. The descriptive knowledge prepares you for absolutely nothing significant. When the brutal tragedy finally strikes, the neat and tidy linguistic framework instantly collapses into dust. You are violently thrown back into the raw, unforgiving realm of pure direct acquaintance, where words fail. Russell highlighted a deep and inescapable contradiction at the heart of human epistemology. Direct acquaintance remains absolutely certain but entirely private, while descriptive knowledge remains completely public but inherently vulnerable to catastrophic error. We build our entire grand societies upon this public knowledge, creating complex institutions based on descriptions, yet the absolute foundation of everything real remains locked inside the solitary human mind. This severe epistemological divide perfectly explains the crushing loneliness saturated throughout modern social media platforms. We follow thousands of distant strangers, consuming daily descriptions of their curated lives, diets, and relationships. We cultivate a fabricated sense of deep closeness. But because we lack any direct acquaintance with their true physical and emotional reality, the intimacy is utterly hollow. We simply surround ourselves with digital ghosts. True philosophical awakening begins when you finally decide to strip away the endless layers of borrowed descriptions and stare honestly at your own vast ignorance. You must ruthlessly examine every single belief you hold and ask yourself how much of it is based on genuine direct experience. You will shockingly discover that almost everything you think you know is merely a fabricated story. Relinquishing the persistent illusion of omniscience does not plunge your spirit into endless despair. It liberates you into a permanent state of childlike wonder. When you accept that your true knowledge is microscopic, every single physical interaction becomes intensely miraculous. The taste of cold water, the texture of rough bark, and the sound of rain become the only sacred truths you actually need. To truly know the world is to realize how very little you have actually touched. Chapter 7. The Engine of Human Desire. A satisfied animal will sleep, but a satisfied human will immediately begin to scheme. Observe the wild animals roaming the savannah. When a great lion devours its prey and satisfies its biological hunger, it simply lies down in the shade and sleeps. It does not stare at the horizon and plot to conquer the neighboring territory. An animal operates solely upon the dictates of immediate physical necessity. Once the primal need is met, the animal achieves absolute peace. Human beings are cursed with a radically different psychological architecture. We are the only creatures on Earth who experience profound agony immediately after our basic survival needs are completely satisfied. Bertrand Russell observed that human desire is a bottomless abyss. When we secure our food, shelter, and physical safety, we do not rest. Instead, we are instantly consumed by an insatiable hunger for something vastly larger. What exactly transforms the human mind into this perpetual engine of dissatisfaction? Russell argues that our agony stems from our unique capacity for imagination. Animals live strictly within the boundary of the present moment, but humans continuously project their minds into artificial futures. We imagine scenarios where we possess more wealth, more status, and more absolute control over our environment. Our imagination, curiously, creates our suffering. Orthodox economists have long argued that human beings are fundamentally driven by a rational desire for material goods and financial wealth. We are told that if we accumulate enough money and property, we will finally achieve lasting happiness. But Russell violently rejected this simplistic economic theory. He recognized that wealth is merely a superficial mask hiding a much deeper and darker psychological motivation. When you strip away the deceptive layers of modern capitalist culture, you discover two primary engines driving human behavior. These endless desires are the relentless pursuit of power and the desperate craving for glory. We do not actually want a mansion because we need shelter from the rain. We want a mansion because it visually demonstrates our dominance and superiority over our fellow human beings. History proves that when forced to choose between enormous wealth and absolute power, ambitious individuals will almost always sacrifice their wealth to secure their dominance. People endlessly bribe officials, commit terrible crimes, and risk imprisonment simply to hold influence over others. Material goods bring only a temporary physical comfort, but power delivers the intoxicating psychological illusion that we have conquered our mortal insignificance. Look at our obsession with modern social media platforms. We curate our digital lives with meticulous precision, posting photographs of our travels, our meals, and our joy. We are not doing this to preserve memories. We are desperately competing in a brutal economy of glory. We crave the validation of strangers because we erroneously believe that external applause will fill the endless void within our own souls. The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer accurately described human life as a pendulum swinging violently between pain and boredom. When we lack something, we feel the agony of desire. The moment we finally acquire it, the thrill instantly evaporates, and we are plunged into suffocating boredom. Russell believed that our limitless imagination guarantees that we will never find a permanent resting place. We are condemned to endlessly chase mirages. Why do we force our children to study relentlessly? Why do we destroy our health working 80 hours a week in a corporate cubicle? We tell ourselves that we are securing a comfortable future. In reality, we are driven by the fear of being subjugated by others. We want to climb to the top of the hierarchy so that we can become the masters rather than the slaves. Russell pointed out a terrifying truth about the ultimate ceiling of human desire. If it were physically possible, every single human being would secretly wish to become an omnipotent God. We want total control over the universe and every living creature within it. Because this absolute domination is impossible, we spend our entire lives frustrated, settling for microscopic kingdoms in our workplaces and our homes. This unrelenting engine of desire creates the spectacular achievements of human civilization, but it also causes every catastrophic war and social injustice. We have built breathtaking cities and launched rockets into the cold void of space. Yet we continually step upon the throats of our neighbors simply to feed our endless psychological hunger. The true tragedy is that the hunger itself can never actually be satisfied. Recognizing that you are trapped in this endless cycle of desire is the first painful step toward genuine philosophical clarity. You must relentlessly question whether your ambitions are truly your own, or if they are merely echoes of a society addicted to power and glory. When you finally stop chasing the horizon, you face the terrifying responsibility of finding meaning in the stillness of the present moment. A mind driven by endless desire is not running toward victory. It is fleeing desperately from its own shadow. Chapter 8: Power as the True Force. The invisible currency of human society is not coined in gold, but forged in absolute dominance. For centuries, orthodox economists and Marxist thinkers alike have propagated a massive psychological illusion. They argue that human beings are fundamentally motivated by the pursuit of material wealth and economic self-interest. We are taught that money is the ultimate goal of all human endeavor. But Bertrand Russell brutally shattered this deeply held societal consensus. He revealed that the craving for commodities is actually quite limited when separated from deeper psychological desires. Once a human being achieves a moderate level of material security, the blind pursuit of wealth utterly ceases to be the primary motivation. What the individual and the society truly crave above all else is pure power. Wealth is frequently mistaken for the ultimate goal, but it is actually only a convenient mechanism used to acquire greater influence over others. When forced to choose exclusively between retaining enormous wealth and exercising absolute power, the ambitious will instinctively choose power. Russell drew a brilliant metaphor inspired by the rapid advancements in 20th century physics. He proposed a theory of social dynamics, suggesting that power functions within human society exactly as energy functions within the natural physical universe. Just as the physical world relies on the constant conversion and flow of energy, the human world is driven by the relentless conversion and transfer of power. Power is the foundational engine of all social reality. This invisible energy assumes countless different forms. Throughout our vast human history, it manifests visibly as tremendous financial wealth, brutal military force, and the more subtle dominion over public opinion. In every single realm of human existence, from political corridors to corporate boardrooms, the atmosphere is saturated with the endless and ruthless games of power dynamics. A person who lacks a strong urge for power will never leave a significant mark upon the evolution of society. However, this intoxicating drive for dominance does not manifest identically within every single human being. Russell astutely divided humanity into two primary psychological categories regarding their relationship with authority. The first group consists of the natural leaders, those intensely ambitious souls who genuinely crave the ability to issue commands and shape the world according to their will. But the second category unveils a much darker and more complex human psychological truth. The second group comprises the followers: individuals who possess a deep inherent cowardice regarding direct confrontation. Instead of seeking overt dominance, their desire for power is ingeniously disguised as fanatical submission to a charismatic leader. By surrendering themselves completely to an authority figure, they psychologically extend their own sense of power. They vicariously experience the thrill of dominance by imagining themselves merged with the formidable strength of the leader they blindly worship. Observe the fanatical celebrity worship and intense political tribalism that dominate our modern digital landscapes today. Millions of people sacrifice their own intellectual independence to defend billionaires, politicians, and cultural icons. They fight vicious online battles defending masters who do not even know they exist. This is not an expression of genuine love or loyalty. It is a pathetic attempt to siphon a tiny drop of power from a towering figure to cure their own existential helplessness. To understand the actions of any human being, you must simply ask whose shadow they are desperately trying to inhabit. Chapter 9. The Construction of Social Reality. Every empire and every society is built upon an invisible foundation of shared hallucinations. We often mistake the physical weapons of a nation for its true source of strength. But Bertrand Russell understood that the ultimate foundation of power is not forged in steel. It is woven entirely from belief. Power emanates from a collective creed, a mutually accepted story that millions of minds decide to treat as absolute reality. Without this shared illusion, the entire social structure would instantly disintegrate into dust. Think about the laws that govern your daily behavior or the money you use to purchase food. These things do not exist in the natural physical world like a mountain or a river exists. They only possess value because we reached a vast psychological agreement to believe in their value. Human beings are essentially imagined communities, bound tightly by the stories we desperately choose to trust. Russell made a startling declaration that directly challenges our modern understanding of force. He stated that in all social affairs, public opinion is actually the ultimate and absolute power. This sounds counterintuitive when we look at heavily armed militaries and ruthless dictators. But a military cannot function unless the soldiers genuinely believe in the cause they are fighting for. Physical weapons only work because psychological propaganda has already conceded. If you wish to control a human being, you do not need to bind their physical wrists with iron chains. You only need to take total control of the ideological framework within their mind. When you dominate the flow of information and shape the narrative of reality, the citizen will willingly restrict their own freedom. The most terrifying prisons are the ones where the inmates ferociously defend the prison guards. Observe the massive and unrelenting information machine that operates in our modern digital era. We are bombarded every single minute by carefully orchestrated narratives, disguised as objective news and innocent entertainment. Algorithms dictate our emotional responses, molding our deepest beliefs without us even realizing we are being systematically programmed. The digital sphere is not a marketplace of free ideas. It is a highly sophisticated battleground for supreme psychological dominance. We cling desperately to the beautiful illusion that we are completely free and independent thinkers. We proudly declare our political opinions and moral stances, assuming we arrived at these conclusions through pure intellectual logic. But Russell forces us to admit that our deepest convictions are often planted there by external cultural forces. We are merely echoing the scripts that the dominant power structure requires us to repeat endlessly. When a population surrenders its capacity for critical thought, truth is quietly replaced by artificial consensus. A lie repeated by a million voices magically transforms into an unquestionable historical fact. If everyone decides to believe a tyrannical action is actually a righteous crusade, the moral reality rotates completely. We do not live in a world dictated by objective truth. We live inside the most convincing story. To truly awaken from this societal hypnosis requires an act of tremendous intellectual courage. You must be willing to step outside the comforting embrace of the herd and question the sacred myths that hold your community together. You must ask why you believe the things you do and who ultimately benefits from your unquestioning loyalty. Awakening means becoming deeply uncomfortable in a world designed to keep you comfortably numb. The moment you stop believing the societal script is the exact moment your mind becomes truly your own. Chapter 10. The Myth of Work. We have been psychologically conditioned to worship the very chains that bind us to the machinery of production. Bertrand Russell pointed out a profound and devastating lie at the heart of modern civilization. From the moment we are born, we are taught that endless hard work is the ultimate moral virtue. We hear maxims praising the industrious and condemning the idle. Yet, this belief is not a natural human instinct, but a carefully constructed illusion designed to benefit a very specific few. Throughout history, a small privileged class relied entirely on the exhausting labor of the vast majority to maintain their luxurious leisure. To prevent rebellion, the rulers did not rely solely on physical violence. Instead, they brilliantly weaponized morality. They convinced the exhausted peasants that their painful toil was actually a noble and sacred duty. transforming forced exploitation into proud spiritual obedience. What exactly is this sacred work we blindly worship? Russell cynically defined labor in two distinct categories. The first is the brutal, lowly paid task of moving physical matter around on the earth. The second is the highly compensated, comfortable position of instructing others to move that matter. The entire system depends on convincing the first group that their physical destruction is an honorable sacrifice. During the 20th century, massive technological advancements and industrial revolutions created the astonishing capability to drastically reduce human working hours. Russell argued that with rational management, a 4-hour workday would provide enough material abundance for everyone. Yet, rather than sharing this technological leisure, we deliberately chose to maintain the exhausting schedules, manufacturing artificial desires just to keep the machinery running relentlessly. Look at our modern corporate obsession with hustle culture and endless productivity. We wear our exhaustion like a badge of honor, bragging about sleepless nights and non-stop grinding. We have completely internalized the demands of the master, willingly whipping ourselves long after the overseer has left the room. We are terrified of empty time because leisure forces us to confront the utter meaninglessness of our routine. True slavery is achieved not when the whip strikes the back, but when the mind willingly kisses the lash. Chapter 11: The Crisis of Modern Life. We are drowning in an ocean of manufactured urgency while our souls slowly die of thirst. Look closely at the frantic pace of your daily existence. We are surrounded by miraculous technological advancements that were supposed to liberate us from endless toil. Yet, instead of enjoying the unprecedented leisure that modern science makes possible, we have actively chosen a path of relentless exhaustion. We force 1/2 of the population to labor until they physically collapse, while the other half suffers unemployment. Why do we willingly participate in this collective madness? Because a mind granted too much free time becomes a terrifying psychological burden to a society built on constant consumption. We invent entirely meaningless industries to produce completely unnecessary commodities, simply to ensure that everyone remains constantly occupied. We are utterly terrified of silence, desperately filling every waking moment with manufactured tasks to avoid confronting our vast emptiness. This perpetual state of overwork violently drains the vital creative energy from the human spirit. When you spend your entire day merely surviving the grueling demands of the modern economy, you return home with nothing left to give. You become entirely passive, seeking only the dullest forms of entertainment to temporarily numb your exhausted brain. True joy requires psychological security, which is systematically assassinated by modern schedules. Consider the bizarre moral logic that governs our society today. We are socially conditioned to believe that the act of earning money is inherently virtuous, while the act of enjoying the fruits of that labor is somehow frivolous or shameful. It is as absurd as believing that a key is wonderful, but the lock it opens is evil. We have completely forgotten how to exist simply for joy. A life spent merely preparing to live is the ultimate tragedy of the human condition. Chapter 12: Freedom through Clarity. To step outside the prison of illusion is to finally breathe the air of absolute reality. What happens when the carefully constructed walls of societal conditioning finally collapse? When you realize that the moral obligation to overwork is a lie, that language is often an empty trap, and that your deepest beliefs were planted by external forces. This is the terrifying yet glorious moment of philosophical awakening. You are left standing alone, in the silent ruins of your former worldview. Bertrand Russell believed that the ultimate purpose of philosophy is not to provide comfortable or definite answers. Instead, its highest value resides entirely in its profound uncertainty. By forcing us to relentlessly question the absurd assumptions of daily life, philosophy violently shatters the invisible cage of ordinary prejudice and habitual dogma. It forces us to accept that the universe is vastly more mysterious than we dared imagine. Imagine a world where the chains of manufactured urgency are finally broken. If we escaped the myth of endless labor and embraced a rational life requiring only 4 hours of work, we would reclaim our stolen humanity. We would no longer be mindless cogs in a machine. We would cultivate science, art, and profound stillness. The mind, free from crushing exhaustion, could finally begin to explore its creative potential. Russell predicted that this radical clarity would fundamentally transform human nature itself. Most of the cruelty, suspicion, and bitterness in our modern society stems directly from a life of arduous struggle and perpetual anxiety. When human beings are finally granted genuine security and unrushed leisure, the deepest roots of malice wither away. Kindness naturally blossoms, not from moral commandments, but from the fertile soil of psychological ease. We stand at a critical intersection in human history. We possess the astonishing technological machinery to eradicate poverty and toil completely. Yet we refuse to evolve because we are terrified of the vast open space of perfect freedom. To choose clarity means rejecting the comforting noise of the crowd. It demands that you stop performing for invisible judges and start living authentically in the raw light of truth. We have traveled together through the fragile nature of reality, the deceptions of language, the hidden machinations of power, and the exhausting myths of modern labor. You now possess the philosophical tools to dismantle the invisible structures that dictate your existence. But possessing the key is only the first step. You must be willing to actually turn it and step boldly into the frightening yet beautiful unknown. If this immense journey through the architecture of reality has awakened your mind and shifted your perspective, please subscribe to this philosophy channel and share this video with those who are ready to see the uncomfortable truth. The conversation does not end here. It simply begins when you finally turn off your screen. If everything you once believed was merely a shadow on the wall, are you brave enough to finally turn around and walk directly into the blinding light?